was kind, intelligent, and beloved by everyone in town. But one foggy morning, she vanished into the forest and left no trace behind, until the detective found a name carved into a tree that should never have been there. What was Eleanor Hartley trying to tell us? And who was watching her in the woods? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The autumn of 1897 descended upon the mountains of Vermont with a peculiar heaviness, as if the very air carried secrets too burdensome for the wind to disperse. Detective Jonathan Ashford stood at the edge of Millbrook, a small town cradled between dense forests and mist-shrouded valleys, watching the morning fog roll through the streets like a living creature. At 32 years of age, he possessed the kind of striking presence that made people take notice. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and penetrating gray eyes that seemed to read the hidden truths in every shadow. His reputation in Boston had been built on solving cases others deemed impossible, but nothing in his decorated career had prepared him for the telegram that had summoned him here 3 days ago. The message had been brief, almost cryptic. Young woman vanished in forest fog. Local authorities baffled. Your expertise urgently required. Mayor Edmund Blackwell, Millbrook, Vermont. Jonathan adjusted his wool overcoat against the October chill and made his way down the cobblestone main street toward the town hall. The buildings here retained the austere charm of early colonial architecture, their wooden facades weathered by countless winters. Shopkeepers were beginning to open their establishments, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery on the corner. Despite the quaint normalcy of the scene, Jonathan could feel an undercurrent of anxiety rippling through the community. People spoke in hushed tones, casting furtive glances toward the tree line that loomed at the town's periphery. Inside the town hall, Mayor Blackwell greeted him with the desperate handshake of a man grasping at his last hope. He was in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair and worry lines etched deeply into his forehead. "Detective Ashford, thank God you've come," the mayor said, ushering him into a modest office dominated by a large oak desk. "I apologize for the urgency of my telegram, but we are at our wits' end. Miss Eleanor Hartley vanished 6 days ago, and despite our best efforts, we have found no trace of her." Jonathan settled into the chair offered to him, withdrawing a small leather notebook from his coat pocket. "Tell me everything, Mayor. Start from the beginning and leave nothing out, no matter how insignificant it may seem." Mayor Blackwell paced to the window, gazing out at the fog-draped forest. "Eleanor is 24 years old, the daughter of our town physician, Dr. Samuel Hartley. She's an extraordinary young woman, kind, intelligent, and devoted to helping her father with his practice. She has extensive knowledge of medicinal herbs and often ventured into the forest to gather plants for her father's remedies. On the morning of October 15th, she left home just after dawn, carrying her collecting basket. She told the housekeeper she would return by midday. But she never did," Jonathan concluded, making notes in his precise handwriting. "Exactly. When she hadn't returned by evening, Dr. Hartley organized a search party. We scoured the forest paths she typically used, but found nothing. No basket, no disturbed earth, no signs of struggle. It was as if the fog had simply swallowed her whole." The mayor's voice cracked with emotion. "Dr. Hartley is beside himself with grief. Eleanor is his only child. His wife passed away when Eleanor was just a girl." Jonathan looked up from his notebook. "You mentioned in your telegram that the local authorities were baffled. What have they concluded?" The mayor returned to his desk, sinking into his chair with a heavy sigh. "Sheriff Morrison believes she may have become disoriented in the fog and fallen into a ravine or perhaps encountered a wild animal. But I cannot accept such explanations. Eleanor knew those woods better than anyone in Millbrook. She would not have lost her way so easily. I would like to speak with Dr. Hartley as soon as possible," Jonathan said, closing his notebook. "And I will need to examine Miss Hartley's room, her belongings, and any places she frequented before her disappearance." "Of course, Detective. I will take you to the Hartley residence immediately." The Hartley home stood on a quiet street lined with maple trees, their leaves aflame with autumn colors. It was a handsome 2-story house of white clapboard with dark green shutters, surrounded by a well-tended garden, now fading into winter dormancy. A wrought iron fence enclosed the property, and a stone path led to the front door. Dr. Samuel Hartley answered the mayor's knock himself. He was a man in his early 50s, tall and lean, with silver-streaked brown hair and eyes that bore the unmistakable stamp of profound sorrow. His clothes, though clean and proper, hung slightly loose on his frame, suggesting recent weight loss. When the mayor introduced Jonathan, the doctor's expression flickered with a desperate hope. "Detective Ashford, please come in," Dr. Hartley said, his voice hoarse. "Forgive the state of the house. I have not been able to bring myself to maintain our usual routines." The interior of the home reflected a life of quiet refinement. The parlor was furnished with comfortable chairs upholstered in deep burgundy, shelves lined with medical texts and classical literature, and photographs in silver frames arranged on the mantelpiece. Jonathan's trained eye noted the details, the dust beginning to accumulate on surfaces, the cold fireplace, the sense of a household suspended in anguished waiting. "Dr. Hartley, I know this is extraordinarily difficult, but I need you to tell me about Eleanor," Jonathan said gently, accepting the seat offered to him. "Not just about the day she disappeared, but about her as a person, her habits, her interests, her relationships. Sometimes the smallest details can illuminate the path forward." Dr. Hartley sat across from him, his hands trembling slightly as he folded them in his lap. "Eleanor is the light of my life, Detective. After my wife died 12 years ago, she became my companion and my purpose. She inherited her mother's beauty, golden hair, eyes the color of the forest in spring, a smile that could chase away the darkest clouds. But more than that, she possesses a keen mind and a compassionate heart. She assists me in my medical practice, learning everything I can teach her. Many patients specifically request her presence during their treatments because her gentle manner soothes their fears." "You mentioned she gathered medicinal herbs in the forest. Did she always go alone?" "Usually, yes. Eleanor was fiercely independent and knowledgeable about the woodland plants. She knew which paths were safe and which areas to avoid. She carried a detailed journal where she recorded her findings, the locations of various plants, their properties, sketches of their appearance. That journal went everywhere with her." Dr. Hartley's voice broke. "But we have not found it, just as we have not found her." Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "In the days before her disappearance, did you notice anything unusual about Eleanor's behavior? Did she seem troubled or distracted? Did she mention meeting anyone or going anywhere different from her usual routes?" The doctor considered this carefully, his brow furrowing in concentration. "Now that you mention it, in the week preceding her disappearance, Eleanor seemed preoccupied. She would sit in the evening with her journal, writing more than usual. When I asked what occupied her thoughts, she smiled and said she had discovered something interesting in the forest, but wanted to verify her findings before sharing them with me. I thought nothing of it at the time. Eleanor often made small discoveries that excited her scholarly nature." This detail sent a ripple of interest through Jonathan's mind. "Did she give you any hint about the nature of this discovery?" "None whatsoever. I wish now that I had pressed her for details, but I respected her desire to present her findings when she felt ready." Anguish shadowed the doctor's face. "If I had only insisted she tell me, perhaps none of this would have happened." "Dr. Hartley, you could not have known," Jonathan said with quiet firmness. "Now I would like to examine Eleanor's room, if you would permit it." The doctor led him upstairs to a bedroom at the end of the hall. As he opened the door, Jonathan felt as though he were stepping into a frozen moment in time. The room was immaculate, clearly preserved exactly as Eleanor had left it. A four-poster bed with a cream-colored quilt stood against one wall. Beside it, a nightstand with a lamp and a small stack of books. A writing desk faced the window, overlooking the garden below. Watercolor paintings of forest scenes adorned the walls. Eleanor's own work, the doctor explained. Jonathan moved methodically through the room, examining everything with careful attention. The books on the nightstand were medical texts and botanical guides. The desk drawers contained correspondence, letters from a female friend who had moved to New York, notes about patient treatments, sketches of plants. But notably absent was the journal Dr. Hartley had mentioned. Her collecting basket and journal are both missing, the doctor confirmed. She would have taken them with her that morning. Jonathan stood at the window, looking out at the forest that loomed beyond the town. The fog still clung to the trees, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that both beckoned and warned. "I would like to walk the paths Eleanor typically used for her herb gathering. Would you be able to show me, or is there someone else familiar with her routes?" "I can show you the main paths," Dr. Hartley said. But there is someone who knew Eleanor's habits even better than I did. Miss Adelaide Morgan, the school teacher. She and Eleanor were close friends and often walked together. Adelaide is devastated by Eleanor's disappearance and has been helping coordinate the search efforts. Then I should speak with Miss Morgan as well, Jonathan said decisively. An hour later, Jonathan found himself in the small schoolhouse at the edge of Millbrook, waiting as the children were dismissed for their midday meal. Adelaide Morgan emerged from the classroom, and Jonathan found himself momentarily taken aback. She was perhaps 26 years old, with rich auburn hair pinned in an elegant Gibson girl style, and eyes of a remarkable violet blue that held both intelligence and deep sadness. She wore a high-necked shirtwaist of dove gray and a dark skirt, her posture straight and graceful, despite the evident weight of worry she carried. "Miss Morgan, I am Detective Jonathan Ashford. Mayor Blackwell suggested I speak with you regarding Miss Eleanor Hartley's disappearance." Adelaide's expression shifted between hope and apprehension. "Detective Ashford, yes, the mayor mentioned you had arrived. Please, let us speak in the classroom where we will have privacy." They entered the small room, still bearing the chalk dust and faint scent of children's lunches. Adelaide gestured to a chair beside her desk, and Jonathan noticed how her hands, though steady, gripped the edge of the desk as though anchoring herself against turbulent emotions. "Miss Morgan, I understand you and Miss Hartley were close friends. Dr. Hartley suggested you might know her forest roots better than anyone." "Eleanor and I have been friends since childhood," Adelaide said, her voice soft but clear. "We walked together often, especially on weekends when I was free from my teaching duties. Eleanor taught me about the plants and their uses, and She paused, a faint smile crossing her lips. "I would read poetry aloud as we walked. Eleanor loved Wordsworth and Keats. Can you tell me about the last time you saw her?" Adelaide's eyes grew distant with memory. "It was 2 days before she vanished. We had tea together at her home on the Saturday afternoon." She seemed excited about something, almost vibrant with suppressed energy. I asked her what had brought such brightness to her spirits, and she said she had found something remarkable in the forest, something that might have historical significance. She promised to show me the following week. Jonathan's pulse quickened. "Did she give you any details about this discovery?" "Very few. She said it was near the old hollow oak, deep in the forest along the eastern ridge. That tree is a landmark. It has been there for hundreds of years, and its trunk is so wide that 3 men could stand inside it. Eleanor said she had been studying the area around it and had found something carved into another tree nearby, something that intrigued her greatly." Adelaide's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "I should have insisted she take me with her immediately. If I had, perhaps she would still be here." Jonathan leaned forward, his gray eyes intent upon Adelaide's face. "Miss Morgan, this carving Eleanor mentioned, did she describe it in any way? Did she say what was carved or why it held such significance for her?" Adelaide pressed her fingers to her temples, clearly struggling to recall every detail of that last conversation. "She said it appeared to be a name, but the letters were old and partially obscured by moss and bark growth. Eleanor believed it might date back to the early colonial period, perhaps even to the first settlers of this region. She was planning to make a careful rubbing of the carving and research it in the historical archives." A tear slipped down Adelaide's cheek. She was so animated, so full of purpose. I have replayed that afternoon in my mind 1,000 times, searching for something I might have missed, some warning sign I failed to recognize. Jonathan withdrew a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her with a gentle gesture. "Miss Morgan, you could not have anticipated what would happen. But your information is invaluable. This carving may be the key to understanding Eleanor's disappearance. Would you be willing to guide me to the hollow oak? I need to see this place for myself." Adelaide accepted the handkerchief, dabbing at her eyes before meeting his gaze with sudden determination. "I will take you there myself, Detective. I have walked those paths with Eleanor so many times that I could find my way even in complete darkness. When would you like to go?" "This afternoon, if the weather permits. We should make use of the daylight hours we have remaining. Then I shall meet you at the edge of the forest at 2 o'clock. There is a trail marker near Dr. Hartley's property, a large stone painted white. I will wait for you there." Adelaide stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that had regained their steadiness. "Detective Ashford, I must ask, do you truly believe you can find her? The local authorities have all but given up hope. Sheriff Morrison told me yesterday that he suspects Eleanor may have met with some tragic accident and that we should prepare ourselves for the worst." Jonathan rose as well, his tall frame radiating a quiet confidence. "Miss Morgan, I have learned in my years of investigative work that cases are rarely as simple as they first appear. Disappearances like Eleanor's often have explanations that lie beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered by careful observation and persistent inquiry. I cannot promise you a particular outcome, but I can promise you this. I will not rest until I have discovered the truth of what happened to your friend." A flush of color touched Adelaide's pale cheeks, and for a moment something beyond grief flickered in her remarkable eyes. A spark of hope, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. "Thank you, Detective. Your words bring me more comfort than you might know." At precisely 2 o'clock, Jonathan arrived at the White Stone Marker, dressed for a forest expedition in sturdy boots, dark trousers, and a heavy woolen jacket. He carried a leather satchel containing a notebook, pencils for making rubbings, a compass, and a coil of rope. The fog had thinned somewhat since morning, but it still wove through the trees like ghostly ribbons, lending an eerie quality to the forest's edge. Adelaide appeared moments later, having changed from her teaching attire into a more practical ensemble, a divided skirt of dark brown wool that allowed for easier walking, a cream-colored blouse with a simple collar, and a fitted jacket. Her auburn hair was pinned securely beneath a modest hat, and she carried a walking stick of polished wood. "You came prepared," Jonathan observed with approval. "Eleanor taught me to always respect the forest," Adelaide replied. "These woods can be unforgiving to those who enter them carelessly. The terrain is rugged, the paths sometimes treacherous, and the fog can disorient even those familiar with the area." They entered the forest together, and Jonathan was immediately struck by the transformation in atmosphere. The sounds of the town faded quickly, replaced by the whisper of wind through branches, the distant call of crows, and the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath their feet. The trees here were ancient, towering pines, massive oaks, and gnarled maples that had witnessed centuries of seasons. Moss covered the rocks and lower tree trunks, and the air held the rich scent of earth and decay. Adelaide led the way with confident strides, following a path that was barely visible to Jonathan's untrained eye. "Eleanor and I used to pretend we were explorers charting unknown territory," she said, her voice taking on a wistful quality. "Even as adults, we never quite lost that sense of wonder about these woods. Eleanor would point out the medicinal properties of various plants: wild ginger for stomach ailments, witch hazel for inflammation, bloodroot for respiratory complaints. Her knowledge was truly remarkable." As they walked deeper into the forest, Jonathan found himself acutely aware of Adelaide's presence beside him. She moved with a natural grace, her familiarity with the terrain evident in every step. There was something compelling about her combination of strength and vulnerability, the way she pressed forward despite her obvious grief. He had encountered many people in his investigative work, but few who possessed Adelaide's quiet dignity. "Tell me more about Eleanor," Jonathan said, as they navigated around a fallen log. "What kind of person was she beyond her knowledge of plants and medicine?" Adelaide paused to point out a fork in the path, indicating they should bear left. Eleanor was one of those rare souls who seemed to bring light wherever she went. She had a laugh that was utterly infectious, and a way of making everyone feel valued and heard. Children adored her. When she assisted her father with young patients, she would tell them stories to distract them from their discomfort. She volunteered at the church, helping to organize charity baskets for families in need, and she possessed the most beautiful singing voice. On Sunday mornings, her soprano would soar above the congregation like a blessing made audible. Jonathan listened intently, constructing in his mind an image of the missing young woman. Was there anyone who held particular enmity toward her? Any rejected suitors or professional rivalries? "Eleanor had no enemies that I knew of," Adelaide said firmly. "As for suitors, there were several gentlemen in town who had expressed interest in courting her. Thomas Whitfield, the banker's son, had been quite persistent in his attentions. Eleanor handled his advances with characteristic grace, but she had no romantic interest in him. She once told me that she had not yet met a man who stirred her heart, and she would rather remain unmarried than settle for a union without true affection." They continued their ascent, the path growing steeper as they climbed the eastern ridge. The fog grew thicker here, swirling around them in translucent curtains. Jonathan could see how easily someone might become disoriented in such conditions, yet Adelaide never hesitated, her internal compass guiding them forward. After nearly an hour of steady climbing, Adelaide stopped and pointed ahead. There, the hollow oak. The tree was magnificent, a giant among giants, Its trunk was easily 15 feet in diameter, gnarled and twisted by age, with deep furrows in the bark. A large opening at its base revealed the hollow interior, dark and mysterious. The oak's branches spread wide, still bearing leaves that rustled in the breeze like whispered secrets. Jonathan approached the tree with reverence, understanding why it had become a landmark. And Eleanor said the carving was on a tree near this one? Yes, but she did not specify which tree or in what direction. There are dozens of large trees in this immediate area. Adelaide's voice carried a note of frustration. I have searched many times since her disappearance, looking for any sign of the carving she mentioned, but the fog and the moss make it nearly impossible to examine every surface. Jonathan set down his satchel and withdrew his notebook. Then we shall conduct a systematic search. Let us work in a spiral pattern, moving outward from the hollow oak. You take the northern arc, and I will take the southern. Examine every tree trunk carefully, looking for anything that might be a carving, no matter how faint or obscured. They worked in concentrated silence, broken only by their calls to each other confirming their positions. Jonathan ran his hands over bark surfaces, brushed away moss, peered at markings both natural and man-made. He found initials carved by lovers, rough crosses that might have marked property boundaries, and the natural patterns that wood creates as it grows and ages. But nothing that seemed to match what Eleanor had described. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting longer shadows through the fog, when Adelaide's voice rang out with sudden urgency. "Detective Ashford, I have found something." Jonathan moved swiftly toward the sound of her voice, finding her standing before a large maple tree approximately 30 yards northwest of the hollow oak. Adelaide's face was flushed with excitement and trepidation as she pointed to a section of the trunk about 5 feet from the ground. Jonathan drew closer, his heart beginning to beat faster. There, carved into the bark in letters that had indeed been partially obscured by moss and the tree's growth, was a name. He carefully brushed away the moss with his gloved hand, revealing the inscription more clearly. The carving read, Eleanor Hartley. Adelaide gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth. But that cannot be. How could her name already be carved here? Unless... Jonathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. This was no colonial-era carving. The letters, though weathered, were not ancient. They appeared to have been carved perhaps a year ago, maybe less. But the implications were staggering. Someone carved Eleanor's name here before her disappearance, Jonathan said quietly, his mind racing through possibilities. The question is who and why? Adelaide's violet blue eyes widened with understanding and fear. You think someone planned this? That her disappearance was not an accident? I am not prepared to draw conclusions yet, but this discovery certainly suggests premeditation. Jonathan withdrew his notebook and began making a detailed sketch of the carving and its location. Miss Morgan, did Eleanor ever mention seeing her own name carved in a tree? Surely if she had found this, she would have been alarmed. She said nothing about finding her own name. She spoke only of discovering a name that might have historical significance. Adelaide wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small and vulnerable in the gathering dusk. Dear God, what does this mean? Who would do such a thing? Jonathan finished his sketch and began to examine the ground around the maple tree. The earth was covered in fallen leaves and pine needles, but as he carefully brushed them aside, he noticed something unusual. There were faint depressions in the soil, as though something had been buried and then removed, or as though someone had disturbed the earth repeatedly. Miss Morgan, when the search parties came through here, did they examine this area specifically? I do not believe so. The searches focused primarily on the lower trails and ravines, places where Eleanor might have fallen or become trapped. No one thought to examine the area around the hollow oak this closely. We were looking for Eleanor herself, not for carvings or clues. Jonathan stood, his expression grave. We need to return to town before darkness falls completely. Tomorrow I will come back with proper equipment to excavate this area. If someone went to the trouble of carving Eleanor's name here, there may be more evidence buried nearby. They began their descent in silence, each lost in troubled thoughts. The forest seemed to press in around them, the fog growing thicker and more oppressive. Jonathan found himself instinctively moving closer to Adelaide, protective of her safety as they navigated the increasingly dim path. Halfway down the ridge, Adelaide stumbled on an exposed root. Jonathan's hand shot out, catching her arm and steadying her before she could fall. For a moment, they stood very close, his hand still on her arm. Her face turned up toward his in the fading light. He could see the fear and exhaustion in her eyes, but also a profound courage that stirred something unexpected within him. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes, thank you. I'm simply weary, I think. This discovery has shaken me more than I care to admit." Adelaide did not immediately pull away from his steadying hand, and Jonathan found himself reluctant to release her. "You have been remarkably brave throughout this ordeal," he said. "Eleanor is fortunate to have such a devoted friend." "I only hope we find her in time," Adelaide whispered. "Each day that passes, I fear the worst." "We will find the truth," Jonathan assured her, finally releasing her arm with gentle reluctance. "Whatever that truth may be, we will uncover it together." They continued their descent, and as they emerged from the forest into the lamplit streets of Millbrook, Jonathan realized that this case had become something more than a professional obligation. The mystery of Eleanor's disappearance was deeply personal to Adelaide, and by extension, it had become personal to him as well. He would not fail her. That evening, Jonathan sat in his room at the Millbrook Inn, reviewing his notes by candlelight. The carving of Eleanor's name haunted him. Someone had known her name, had carved it into that tree, and had done so with purpose. Was it a threat? A marker? A twisted form of claiming her? He thought of Adelaide's stricken face when they had discovered the carving, the way her voice had trembled with fear and confusion. He found himself wanting to shield her from further pain, to solve this mystery not just for the sake of justice, but to restore peace to those remarkable violet blue eyes. A knock at his door interrupted his reverie. When he opened it, he found Dr. Hartley standing in the hallway, his face drawn with anxiety. "Detective Ashford, forgive the late intrusion. Adelaide Morgan came to see me this evening. She told me about the carving you discovered. I had to speak with you immediately." Jonathan stepped aside, allowing the doctor to enter. "Dr. Hartley, please sit down. What is it you need to tell me?" The doctor sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "Eleanor did mention something to me about 2 weeks before her disappearance. I did not think it significant at the time, but now, in light of what you have found, I fear it may be crucial. Eleanor told me that she had been feeling as though someone was watching her during her forest walks. She had no proof, just an uncomfortable sense of being observed. I dismissed it as her imagination, told her it was likely just a deer or some other woodland creature. But what if I was wrong? What if someone truly was following her?" Jonathan felt his jaw tighten. Did she describe any specific incidents? Any times when this feeling was particularly strong? She said it happened most often when she went to gather herbs near the hollow oak. She felt eyes upon her, heard branches breaking as though someone moved through the underbrush nearby. Once, she thought she saw a figure in the fog, but when she called out, there was no answer. And when she went to investigate, she found no one. Dr. Hartley's voice broke. "I told her she was letting the isolation of the forest affect her nerves. I failed to protect her, Detective. I failed my daughter when she needed me most." Jonathan placed a hand on the older man's shoulder. "Dr. Hartley, you could not have known, but this information is valuable. Someone was indeed watching Eleanor, stalking her, perhaps planning what was to come. Tomorrow I will return to the forest with tools to excavate the area around that maple tree. I will also speak with Sheriff Morrison about organizing a more thorough search of the surrounding area. Whoever carved that name may have left other evidence behind." After the doctor departed, Jonathan stood at his window, gazing out at the dark forest that surrounded Millbrook. Somewhere in those woods lay the answer to Eleanor's disappearance, and he would not rest until he found it. For Eleanor's sake, for her father's sake, and for Adelaide, whose sorrowful courage had touched something deep within his carefully guarded heart. The morning sun broke through the fog with unusual vigor, casting golden shafts of light across Millbrook as Jonathan prepared for his return to the forest. He had spent a restless night, his mind turning over the evidence like puzzle pieces that refused to form a complete picture. The carving, Eleanor's sense of being watched, the mysterious discovery she had mentioned to Adelaide, all of it pointed toward something deliberate, something planned. This was no simple disappearance caused by disorientation or accident. Jonathan gathered his excavation tools, a small folding shovel, a trowel, brushes for careful clearing of soil, and several cloth bags for collecting any evidence he might uncover. He also packed his revolver, a precaution he hoped would prove unnecessary, but could not dismiss given the sinister implications of what they had discovered. As he descended the stairs of the inn, he found Adelaide waiting in the lobby, dressed once again in her practical forest walking attire. Her face showed signs of sleepless worry, dark circles beneath her eyes, but her expression was resolute. "Miss Morgan, I did not expect to see you so early," Jonathan said, surprised by both her presence and the way his heart lifted at the sight of her. "I could not sleep, Detective. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that carving, Eleanor's name cut into the tree like a—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Like a headstone. I must return with you to the forest. Perhaps there are other clues I might recognize, things that would mean nothing to you but might illuminate Eleanor's state of mind or activities." Jonathan understood the need driving her, the desperate desire to be useful when helplessness threatened to consume all hope. "Very well, but I must insist that you remain close to me at all times. If someone did indeed orchestrate Eleanor's disappearance, they may still be in these woods, and I will not risk your safety." A faint color touched Adelaide's cheeks at his protective words. "I will follow your instructions precisely, Detective Ashford. You have my word." They walked together through the awakening town, past shopkeepers sweeping their stoops and housewives heading to market with baskets over their arms. Several townspeople stopped to stare at them, and Jonathan could hear the whispers that followed in their wake. The detective from Boston and the school teacher, heading into the forest where Eleanor Hartley had vanished. The speculation was inevitable in a town this small, but Jonathan found he cared little for gossip when truth remained elusive. At the white stone marker, they paused. Jonathan adjusted his satchel and met Adelaide's eyes with steady purpose. "Whatever we find today, Miss Morgan, we must remain clear-headed and methodical. Can you do that?" "I can," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "For Eleanor's sake, I can be strong." The ascent to the hollow oak seemed swifter in the morning light, though no less arduous. The fog had retreated to scattered wisps that clung to the highest branches, and birds called to one another in the canopy above. When they reached the ancient oak, Jonathan immediately proceeded to the maple tree where Eleanor's name was carved. In daylight, the carving appeared even more deliberate and unsettling. The letters were deeply cut, made with a sharp blade and a steady hand. Jonathan ran his fingers over the grooves, feeling their depth, estimating the force required to create such marks. "Whoever did this took their time," he murmured. This was not carved in haste or secrecy. They worked carefully, perhaps over multiple visits to this location. Adelaide hugged herself against a chill that seemed to come from within rather than from the October air. The thought that someone stood here carving her name, planning whatever terrible fate befell her. "It makes my blood run cold, Detective." Jonathan began his excavation at the base of the maple tree, carefully removing layers of fallen leaves and pine needles. The soil beneath was dark and rich, typical of the forest floor. But as he dug deeper with his trowel, his fingers struck something that was decidedly not soil. Adelaide gasped as Jonathan carefully extracted a small book bound in leather, its cover stained with earth and moisture. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing pages filled with elegant handwriting, botanical sketches, and pressed flower specimens. "Eleanor's journal," Adelaide breathed, kneeling beside him to examine the precious discovery. "Oh, thank God. This might tell us everything." Jonathan turned the pages with utmost care, mindful of their fragile condition. The entries chronicled Eleanor's herb-gathering expeditions, her observations of plant growth cycles, her notes on medicinal preparations. But as he neared the final entries, the content shifted dramatically. The entry dated October 10th, 5 days before Eleanor's disappearance, read, "I have made the most extraordinary discovery near the hollow oak. While searching for wild ginseng, I noticed a man observing me from a distance. When I called out to him, he did not respond, but instead retreated deeper into the forest. His behavior struck me as peculiar, and I determined to be more cautious in my wanderings. However, my curiosity was piqued, and I returned the following day to the same location. There, I found a crude shelter hidden among the dense undergrowth, a canvas lean-to with provisions and personal effects. It appeared someone had been living in the forest, watching the town, watching perhaps even specific individuals. Among the items in the shelter, I discovered a notebook containing sketches. I was horrified to recognize that many of these sketches were of me, detailed drawings of my face, my clothing, my movements through the forest. I also found a carving knife and a list of dates and times, which I now realize correspond to my usual herb-gathering schedule. Jonathan's jaw clenched as he read, and Adelaide made a small sound of distress. He continued reading. I knew I should have reported this immediately to Father or to Sheriff Morrison, but I was overcome with a determination to understand who this person was and what they intended. I copied the contents of the notebook as best I could into my own journal, then replaced everything exactly as I had found it. I resolved to watch for this mysterious observer and perhaps confront him, demand to know his purpose. Looking back now as I write this, I recognize my foolishness, but I felt such anger at being watched like prey, such violation of my privacy and safety, that caution fled in the face of indignation. The next entry, dated October 13th, was shorter but more ominous. I have seen him again. He is a tall man, lean and weathered, with dark hair and a scar across his left cheek. He wears rough clothing, like a trapper or woodsman. This morning I followed him at a distance and discovered he has been carving my name into a maple tree near the hollow oak. The sight filled me with such terror that I fled back to town without gathering any herbs. I have decided I must tell Father everything tomorrow, but tonight I am compiling all my observations into this journal and will hide it near the hollow oak. If anything should happen to me, perhaps someone will find this record and understand what I discovered. The final entry, dated October 14th, the day before her disappearance, consisted of only a few lines. He knows that I have seen him. This morning, I found a note pinned to our garden gate. The forest keeps its secrets, Miss Hartley. Come at dawn tomorrow, alone, and I will explain everything. Tell no one, or others will suffer. I am frightened, but I cannot risk harm coming to Father or to Adelaide, or to anyone else in Millbrook. I will go to meet him, but I will leave this journal as insurance. To whoever finds this, his shelter is 30 paces due east from the hollow oak, concealed beneath a fallen hemlock. May God protect me. Jonathan closed the journal, his mind racing with fury and determination. Eleanor had walked into a trap, her courage and sense of responsibility exploited by a calculating predator. He looked at Adelaide and saw tears streaming down her face. She tried to protect us, Adelaide whispered. She went to meet this monster because he threatened harm to others. That is exactly what Eleanor would do. Sacrifice herself for those she loved. Jonathan stood, helping Adelaide to her feet with gentle firmness. Miss Morgan, we now have crucial information. This man, whoever he is, has been living in the forest, stalking Eleanor for God knows how long. She described a shelter 30 paces east of the hollow oak. We are going to find that shelter, and with it, perhaps we will find Eleanor herself. They moved with renewed urgency, Jonathan counting out 30 paces due east from the ancient oak. True to Eleanor's description, they found a fallen hemlock, its massive trunk creating a natural barrier. Behind it, concealed with remarkable skill, was the shelter Eleanor had discovered. The lean-to was still there, though it appeared recently abandoned. Jonathan approached it carefully, his hand on his revolver. Inside, he found a bedroll, tins of preserved food, a canteen, and most damning of all, the notebook Eleanor had described. Jonathan opened it with a sense of grim vindication. The sketches were indeed of Eleanor, page after page of her face from different angles, her figure as she walked through the forest, detailed studies of her hands, her profile, her smile. The obsession documented in these drawings was chilling in its intensity. Jonathan also found the list of dates and times, a meticulous schedule of Eleanor's movements. But there was more. Tucked between the pages was a letter, written in a rough, barely literate hand. She thinks she is so clever, discovering my camp, copying my notes. She does not understand that I have been waiting for this. I have planned every detail. When she comes to meet me tomorrow morning, I will take her to the place I have prepared, deep in the caves beneath Raven's Peak. There she will remain until she understands that she belongs to me, that I have chosen her, that she has no future but the one I design. If she resists, I will ensure she never leaves those caves alive. I am patient. I can wait for her to accept her fate. Adelaide swayed on her feet, and Jonathan caught her, supporting her weight against him. Raven's Peak, she said faintly. It is a rocky outcropping 2 miles northeast of here. There are caves in the cliff face, narrow and deep. Few people venture there because the terrain is treacherous. Jonathan's mind crystallized into sharp focus. Then that is where we will find Eleanor. Gather yourself, Miss Morgan. We must return to town immediately and organize a proper search party. We will need rope, lanterns, and armed men. This man is dangerous and delusional. but now we know where to look." They descended the mountain at a near run, Jonathan keeping a protective hand on Adelaide's elbow as they navigated the rough terrain. When they burst into Sheriff Morrison's office an hour later, breathless and disheveled, the sheriff looked up in surprise. "Detective Ashford, Miss Morgan, what on earth—" Jonathan slammed Eleanor's journal onto the sheriff's desk. "Sheriff Morrison, I have found evidence that Eleanor Hartley was deliberately lured into a trap by a man who has been stalking her for weeks, possibly months. He has taken her to caves beneath Raven's Peak. We need to organize a rescue party immediately." The sheriff's face hardened as he read through the journal entries. "Dear God, this is beyond anything I imagined. I will gather my deputies and as many able men as I can find. Raven's Peak is dangerous even in daylight. We will need to proceed carefully." Within an hour, a party of 15 men had assembled, including Sheriff Morrison, his 3 deputies, Dr. Hartley, Mayor Blackwell, and several townsmen with experience in the wilderness. Jonathan insisted that Adelaide remain in town, but she refused with such fierce determination that he finally relented, extracting a promise that she would stay close to him and retreat at the first sign of danger. The journey to Raven's Peak took them through the densest part of the forest, over rough terrain studded with boulders and fallen trees. The peak itself was an imposing formation of gray stone that jutted from the forest like a broken tooth. At its base, dark openings yawned in the cliff face, the entrances to the cave system. Sheriff Morrison divided the men into 3 groups, each taking a different cave entrance. Jonathan led his group, which included Adelaide, Dr. Hartley, and 2 deputies, into the largest opening. They lit their lanterns and advanced into the darkness, the temperature dropping noticeably as they moved deeper underground. The cave tunnels were narrow and winding, with low ceilings that forced them to crouch in places. Water dripped from stalactites, creating an eerie symphony of echoes. Jonathan called out Eleanor's name periodically, his voice bouncing off the stone walls. They had been searching for perhaps 20 minutes when Adelaide suddenly gripped Jonathan's arm. "Listen," she whispered urgently. "Do you hear that?" Jonathan strained his ears and caught it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, like someone crying or calling weakly from a great distance. "This way," he said, moving toward the sound with renewed energy. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and there, in the flickering light of their lanterns, they saw her. Eleanor Hartley sat against the far wall, her hands bound with rope, her dress torn and stained, her golden hair disheveled. But she was alive, her green eyes widening with disbelief and hope as the rescue party emerged from the darkness. "Eleanor!" Dr. Hartley rushed forward, and Adelaide was right behind him. Jonathan quickly cut the ropes binding Eleanor's hands and feet, while the doctor examined his daughter for injuries. "Father!" Eleanor's voice was hoarse from thirst and crying. "Adelaide, thank God you found me. He said no one would ever find me here, that I would remain here until I agreed to—" She broke off, shuddering. "Where is he?" Jonathan demanded, his hand on his revolver. "Where is the man who took you?" "He left hours ago, said he was going to town for supplies. He has been bringing me water and food, trying to convince me that he loves me, that we are meant to be together. He is completely mad, Detective. He speaks of us building a life here in these caves, away from the world. When I refused, he grew angry and threatened to hurt people in Millbrook if I did not comply. At that moment, a voice echoed through the chamber from the tunnel entrance they had just exited. "You should have stayed away. This does not concern you." Jonathan spun around to see a tall, lean man emerging from the shadows, exactly matching Eleanor's description. Dark hair, weathered features, and a prominent scar across his left cheek. In his hands, he held a rifle pointed directly at the group. "Put down your weapons," the man commanded, his voice rough but steady. "All of you. I do not wish to harm anyone, but I will if you try to take her from me. Eleanor is mine. I have watched her for 2 years, learned everything about her, prepared a place for us. You cannot understand what we have together." Jonathan raised his hands slowly, his mind calculating distances, angles, and possibilities with the precision that had made him one of Boston's most successful detectives. The 2 deputies behind him began to lower their weapons as commanded, but Jonathan noticed that Sheriff Morrison, who had entered from a side tunnel with his group, was now positioned behind the intruder, concealed by shadows and an outcropping of rock. "What is your name?" Jonathan asked, his voice calm and measured, deliberately drawing the man's attention. He needed to keep him talking, keep him focused forward while the sheriff maneuvered into position. "My name does not matter," the man replied. though his eyes flickered with something like pride. "But if you must call me something, I am Nathaniel Graves. I was a trapper once before I saw her, before Eleanor became my entire world." Eleanor pressed herself against the cave wall, her face pale with terror. Adelaide moved to shield her friend with her own body, an act of courage that made Jonathan's chest tighten with admiration and fear for her safety. "Mr. Graves," Jonathan continued, taking a small step forward, "I can see that you have strong feelings for Miss Hartley, but surely you must recognize that holding her captive is not the foundation for any genuine relationship. If you truly care for her, you would want her happiness, would you not?" Nathaniel's expression twisted with anguish and anger. "Happiness? What do any of you know about happiness? I have lived alone in these forests for years, watching the townspeople with their comfortable lives, their easy affections. Then I saw Eleanor, and for the first time in my wretched existence, I felt something beyond mere survival. She is like light itself, detective. She is everything beautiful and good that this harsh world lacks. I knew from the moment I first observed her gathering herbs that she was meant to be mine. But she is not yours, Dr. Etrar," Hartley said, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. "She is my daughter, a free woman with her own will and desires. You have terrorized her, imprisoned her, violated every principle of decency and law. Release her now, and perhaps some mercy might be shown to you." Nathaniel laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the chamber. "Mercy? I expect no mercy from this world. I have received none in my entire life. My parents abandoned me as a child. I have worked like a beast, lived like an animal, been scorned and rejected by every person who ever looked upon me. Eleanor is the only thing that has ever mattered, and I will not surrender her to you or anyone else." Jonathan saw Sheriff Morrison creeping closer, and he knew he needed to maintain the man's focus for just a few moments longer. "Mr. Graves, you speak of being rejected and scorned, and I understand that such pain can drive a person to desperate acts. But consider this. If you harm anyone here today, if you continue down this path, you will only prove right those who rejected you. You will become the monster they believed you to be. But if you lower your weapon now, if you allow Eleanor to leave freely, you demonstrate that you are capable of something greater than your pain. You show that you are capable of genuine love, which means wanting what is best for the person you claim to cherish, even if it means letting her go." For a moment, something in Nathaniel's eyes shifted, a flicker of uncertainty, of desperate hope that perhaps there was another way. His rifle lowered fractionally, and in that instant, Sheriff Morrison lunged from the shadows, tackling the man from behind. The rifle discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet ricocheting off the cave walls. Jonathan threw himself forward, shielding Adelaide and Eleanor with his body as chaos erupted. The two deputies rushed in to assist the sheriff, and within moments, they had Nathaniel pinned to the ground, his rifle kicked away, his arms wrenched behind his back and secured with iron manacles. Nathaniel struggled and raged, cursing and weeping in turns. "You do not understand," he shouted as the deputies hauled him to his feet. "I love her. I would have given her everything. We could have been happy here, away from all of you, away from the world that only brings pain." Eleanor buried her face in her father's chest, her body shaking with sobs of relief and residual terror. Adelaide held them both, her own tears flowing freely. Jonathan stood and holstered his revolver, his hand not quite steady as the adrenaline began to ebb. Sheriff Morrison approached Jonathan, extending his hand. "That was quick thinking, detective. You kept him talking just long enough for me to get the jump on him. If you had tried to rush him directly, someone would surely have been shot. I am simply grateful everyone is safe," Jonathan replied, shaking the sheriff's hand firmly. Then he turned to where Adelaide stood with the Hartleys. "Miss Morgan, are you hurt?" Adelaide looked up at him, her violet blue eyes luminous with unshed tears and something deeper, something that made Jonathan's heart beat faster. "I am unharmed, thanks to you, Detective Ashford. When that rifle fired, you—" her voice caught. "You did not hesitate to place yourself between us and danger. I could not do otherwise," Jonathan said quietly. And in that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of violence and terror, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of connection that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. The journey back to Millbrook was slow and careful. Eleanor, though physically unharmed beyond exhaustion and minor bruises, was deeply shaken by her ordeal. Dr. Hartley supported her on one side, Adelaide on the other, while the sheriff and his deputies marched Nathaniel Graves ahead of them, the man now silent and defeated, the fury drained from him to leave only hollow despair. As they emerged from the forest into the afternoon sunlight, the town erupted in celebration. Word had spread that Eleanor had been found alive, and townspeople lined the streets, calling out their joy and relief. Mayor Blackwell rushed forward to greet them, his face shining with tears of gratitude. "Thank God, he kept repeating. "Detective Ashford, you have saved one of our most precious citizens. Millbrook owes you a debt we can never repay." But Jonathan's attention was not on the mayor's effusive praise. He was watching Adelaide, who had stepped back to allow the Hartleys their reunion with friends and neighbors, her expression a mixture of exhausted relief and lingering sorrow. He made his way to her side. "Miss Morgan, you should rest. You have been through a terrible ordeal." Adelaide turned to him, and to his surprise she reached out and took his hand, a gesture so natural and trusting that it sent warmth flooding through him. "I cannot rest yet, Detective. There is too much in my heart and mind. Would you walk with me for a moment? I find I need to speak with someone who understands what we have witnessed, and you are the only one who truly does." "It would be my honor," Jonathan replied, and they walked together away from the celebrating crowd, toward the quieter streets at the edge of town. They found themselves at a small park overlooking the valley, where maple trees blazed with autumn color, and a wooden bench offered a place to sit. Adelaide settled onto the bench with a deep sigh, and Jonathan sat beside her, acutely aware of her nearness, of the way the fading sunlight caught in her auburn hair. "I keep thinking about what that man said," Adelaide began, her voice soft and thoughtful, "about pain and rejection driving him to desperate acts. It does not excuse what he did, not for a moment, but it reminds me that we never truly know what darkness others carry within them, what wounds they nurse in silence. You have a compassionate heart, Miss Morgan, to find room for such thoughts even after what he put you and Eleanor through. Perhaps, or perhaps I'm simply trying to make sense of senselessness." She turned to look at him directly, her remarkable eyes holding his. "Detective Ashford, Jonathan, if I may be so bold, you saved Eleanor's life today. More than that, you gave all of us back our hope when it seemed lost. How can I ever thank you adequately?" Jonathan felt his carefully maintained professional detachment crumbling in the face of her sincerity and the vulnerability in her gaze. "Adelaide," he said, using her given name for the first time, finding it felt natural and right on his lips. "I did only what duty demanded, but I confess that my motivation was not purely professional. From the moment I met you, I found myself deeply invested not just in solving this case, but in easing your suffering, in proving worthy of the trust you placed in me." A faint blush colored Adelaide's cheeks. "You speak as though your concern for me went beyond mere courtesy." "It did. It does." Jonathan took a breath, knowing he was crossing a line he had always maintained between his professional and personal life, but finding he could not help himself. "Adelaide, I realize we have known each other only a few days, and under the most trying circumstances, but in that short time, I have come to admire you profoundly. Your courage, your intelligence, your loyalty to your friend, all of these qualities have touched me in ways I did not anticipate and cannot easily dismiss." Adelaide's hand, still resting near his on the bench, moved almost imperceptibly closer. "I have felt something similar, though I hardly dared acknowledge it even to myself. You came to Millbrook as a stranger, yet you fought for Eleanor as though she were your own family. You listened to me, trusted my knowledge of the forest, treated me as a partner rather than merely a source of information. And today, when that rifle fired, you—" her voice broke slightly, "you put yourself in harm's way without a moment's hesitation. How could such actions not affect my heart?" Jonathan covered her hand with his own, a gesture that felt both daring and inevitable. "When this case is concluded, when I have testified against Nathaniel Graves and ensured he faces justice for his crimes, I must return to Boston. My work, my life, everything I have built is there. But Adelaide, I find myself wishing desperately that it were not so, that I had some reason to remain in Millbrook, or better yet, some reason to ask you to—" He stopped, suddenly uncertain, afraid of presuming too much. "To ask me what?" Adelaide prompted gently, her fingers curling around his. "To ask you to consider a future that might include me. I know it is far too soon to speak of such things with any certainty, but I would be dishonest if I did not acknowledge that the thought of leaving you, of returning to Boston, and perhaps never seeing you again, causes me genuine pain." Adelaide's eyes shimmered with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow. "Jonathan, I am a practical woman, a school teacher in a small town with modest prospects and no illusions about romance. Yet I would be lying if I said I had not imagined what it might be like if you stayed, if this connection we have found could be given time to grow into something lasting and true. But I would never ask you to abandon your career, your life in the city, for someone you have known mere days." "What if I wanted to?" Jonathan asked, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "What if I have been searching all my life for something without knowing what it was, only to find it here, in a small town in Vermont, in the courage and grace of a schoolteacher who faced danger without flinching? Adelaide, I am not a man given to impulsive decisions, but neither am I a fool. I know something extraordinary when I encounter it, and you are extraordinary." They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped, the weight of possibility hanging between them like the golden autumn light. Then Adelaide spoke, her voice steady despite the emotion it carried. "Then let us make an agreement, you and I. You will return to Boston and complete your obligations there. I will remain here and continue my teaching. We will correspond by letter, learning more about each other through the written word, testing whether what we feel now can survive distance and time. And if after several months we both find that our feelings have not diminished, but rather deepened, then we will meet again and discuss what future we might build together. Does that seem reasonable?" Jonathan raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply felt. "It seems eminently reasonable, though I warn you now that I am already certain of what my heart will tell me months hence." Adelaide smiled, a true smile that transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. "And I suspect I know my own heart as well. But let us do this properly, Jonathan. Let us give ourselves time to be sure so that when we come together, if we come together, it will be with full knowledge and commitment, not merely the passion born of dramatic circumstances." "You are wise as well as beautiful," Jonathan murmured. "Very well. We shall proceed as you suggest, though I confess the prospect of months without seeing you seems an almost unbearable trial." "Then your letters had better be extraordinarily compelling, Detective Ashford," Adelaide replied with a hint of playful challenge in her voice, "to sustain me through the long winter ahead." They remained on that bench as the sun set, talking of their lives, their hopes, their dreams, sharing the kind of deep and honest conversation that forms the foundation of lasting affection. Jonathan spoke of his work in Boston, the satisfaction of solving complex cases, but also the loneliness of a life devoted entirely to profession. Adelaide described her love of teaching, her modest dreams of perhaps one day writing a book about the medicinal plants of Vermont, her quiet contentment in small-town life tempered by occasional longings for something more. As twilight descended and the first stars appeared, they walked back toward the center of town together. At the door of the boarding house where Adelaide rented a room, they paused. "I will be in Millbrook another week at least, ensuring that all legal matters are properly handled and that Nathaniel Graves is securely transported to stand trial," Jonathan said. "Might I call on you during that time? Perhaps take you to dinner or accompany you on a walk if the weather permits." "I would like that very much," Adelaide replied. "And Jonathan, thank you, not just for finding Eleanor, but for seeing me, truly seeing me. That is a gift I had not expected to receive." "The gift is mine, Adelaide. You have reminded me that life holds more than professional achievements and solved cases. You have reminded me what it means to hope for something beyond duty." The following week passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Jonathan worked closely with Sheriff Morrison to document every aspect of Nathaniel Graves's crimes, gathering evidence for the trial that would surely see the man imprisoned for many years. Eleanor, recovering under her father's devoted care, provided detailed testimony about her captivity, though she refused to see Nathaniel himself, a decision everyone supported. Throughout these proceedings, Jonathan and Adelaide found moments to be together. A quiet dinner at the town's modest restaurant, walks through the autumn forest now stripped of its menace, evenings spent in the Hartley parlor where Eleanor, pale but smiling, insisted on hearing every detail of how Jonathan had tracked the clues that led to her rescue. It was during one of these evenings that Eleanor, looking between Jonathan and Adelaide with knowing eyes, took Adelaide's hand and squeezed it gently. "I see how you look at each other," she said softly, "and I am glad. Something beautiful should come from this terrible ordeal, and I can think of no two people more deserving of happiness than you both." On Jonathan's final day in Millbrook, he stood once more at the white stone marker at the forest's edge. But this time Adelaide was beside him, and the forest held no terrors, only memories of a mystery solved and a connection forged. "I will write to you as soon as I reach Boston," Jonathan promised, holding both her hands in his. "And I will count the days until I can return to Vermont, to you. And I will answer every letter with ones of my own," Adelaide replied. "Be safe in your travels, Jonathan. And know that you carry with you the admiration and affection of one schoolteacher who will be watching the mail with great anticipation." Their parting kiss was gentle and brief, mindful of propriety but full of promise. As Jonathan boarded the train that would carry him back to Boston, he looked out the window to see Adelaide standing on the platform, her hand raised in farewell, her auburn hair catching the morning light. The months that followed tested their commitment but ultimately strengthened it. Letters flew back and forth between Boston and Millbrook, growing longer and more intimate with each exchange. Jonathan wrote of his cases, but also of his growing realization that the excitement of detective work paled beside the prospect of building a life with Adelaide. Adelaide wrote of her students, her walks in the forest where she had once feared to tread, and her own deepening certainty that what she felt for Jonathan was not merely gratitude or the romance of dramatic circumstances, but genuine love. When spring came to Vermont, painting the mountains with green and filling the air with the scent of apple blossoms, Jonathan returned to Millbrook. This time, he came not as a detective on a case, but as a man with a question to ask and a future to propose. He found Adelaide in her schoolhouse on a Saturday afternoon, arranging flowers in a vase on her desk. When she saw him standing in the doorway, her face lit with such joy that Jonathan felt his heart might burst with the fullness of his own happiness. "You came," she said simply, crossing the room to meet him. "I promised I would," Jonathan replied, taking her hands in his. "Adelaide Morgan, I have spent 6 months away from you, and in that time, every moment has confirmed what my heart knew from the beginning. I love you. I love your courage, your intelligence, your compassion, your strength. I love the way you face the world with grace and determination, and I cannot imagine spending the rest of my life without you beside me. Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a detective from Boston who has decided that the greatest mystery worth solving is how to make you happy for the next 50 years? Adelaide's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Yes, Jonathan Ashford. Yes, with all my heart. I love you too, and I have loved you since that first day when you listened to my fears and promised to find the truth. I will marry you, and together we will build a life that honors both your work and mine, that bridges the distance between city and small town, that proves love can flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances." Their wedding, held on a perfect June day in the small Millbrook church, was attended by the entire town. Eleanor, fully recovered and radiant as a bridesmaid, stood beside Adelaide with tears of happiness streaming down her face. Dr. Hartley walked Adelaide down the aisle with pride, grateful to the detective who had not only saved his daughter, but had also brought such joy to his dear friend. Jonathan and Adelaide settled into a life divided between Boston and Millbrook, spending Jonathan's busiest working months in the city and returning to Vermont for long summers and holidays. Adelaide continued her teaching when in Millbrook and pursued her writing when in Boston, eventually publishing her book on medicinal plants to considerable acclaim. Jonathan's detective work flourished, enhanced by Adelaide's keen insights and her ability to see details others missed. Years later, when they told the story of how they met to their children, they always emphasized not the terror and danger, but the unexpected gift that crisis had brought them, the gift of finding each other, of recognizing in a stranger the person who would become home, heart, and happiness. And in the forest near Millbrook, the hollow oak still stood, a silent witness to the mystery that had brought two souls together. The maple tree with its carved name remained as well, but now it served not as a reminder of darkness, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of love, born from courage, trust, and the determination to seek truth even in the deepest fog.